The evening started just like any other. Steve Harvey, dressed in his usual sharp suit, took center stage, exuding the charisma that had made him one of the most popular talk show hosts in the world. His quick wit and lively personality set the tone for the evening as he bantered with the audience and guests alike, creating a relaxed and entertaining atmosphere. Everyone was looking forward to the latest episode, and tonight's guest? None other than Keanu Reeves, the beloved actor known for his roles in The Matrix, John Wick, and a slew of other films that had captured the hearts of audiences worldwide. Keanu, true to his understated style, entered the stage dressed in his signature black suit, a stark contrast to the bright lights and enthusiastic applause of the studio audience. His entrance was met with raucous applause, and as always, Keanu kept his cool, flashing a warm smile and acknowledging the audience with a simple wave. Despite being one of Hollywood's most well-known stars, Keanu's quiet and humble demeanor set him apart from the usual attention-seeking behavior of many of his peers. There was an air of mystery around him, which only seemed to add to his allure. As the interview began, it followed the usual script. Steve, in his usual playful manner, greeted Keanu and asked about his most recent work. The conversation was light, filled with jokes and anecdotes, with Keanu offering his characteristic deadpan humor. Steve, not missing a beat, teased Keanu about his stoic, action hero persona in John Wick. "Keanu," Steve laughed, "you're the only guy I know who can shoot 50 people and still not break a sweat. How do you do that?" The audience erupted in laughter, and Keanu, ever the professional, simply smiled and shrugged. "I guess it's just the character," he said in his typically soft-spoken manner. It was clear that both men enjoyed the playful back and forth. Steve continued to keep the crowd engaged, joking about how serious Keanu always appeared in his films, never cracking a smile. Keanu, in his signature understated style, responded with a dry wit that kept the audience entertained. As the conversation continued, the energy in the room began to shift. Steve, ever the insightful host, started to probe a little deeper, shifting the conversation away from the typical banter and into more personal territory. He asked Keanu about his thoughts on fame and how it had impacted his life. It was a question that seemed to catch Keanu off guard. For someone who had built a career on playing tough, action-packed roles, Keanu had always been a private person. He rarely shared details about his personal life, preferring to keep his own experiences out of the spotlight. When asked about fame, Keanu's response was thoughtful, but cautious. "I think fame is just part of the job," he said. "It's not something you can control, and it's certainly not something I ever sought after. I just try to focus on doing the work." His answer was sincere, yet there was a guardedness to it, an indication that Keanu wasn't entirely comfortable discussing the topic. Steve, sensing the shift in Keanu's energy, quickly pivoted, asking about his time working on the Matrix films and the lasting impact the series had on pop culture. But despite the change in direction, the tone of the conversation had already shifted. There was an unspoken understanding between Steve and Keanu, one that suggested a deeper connection beyond the usual celebrity interview. Steve, with his decades of experience on talk shows, recognized the subtle signals. Keanu was an open book, in many ways, but there were certain chapters of his life that he wasn't willing to share with the world. Steve respected that, but he couldn't help but wonder what lay beneath Keanu's calm exterior. Keanu's response to questions about The Matrix was gracious, and he offered a few interesting behind-the-scenes anecdotes. He spoke about his relationship with the director, Lana Wachowski, and how the film had changed his life in ways he hadn't expected. "It's always special when you're part of something that resonates with people," Keanu said quietly, his eyes lighting up as he spoke. "About the legacy of The Matrix. The impact it has on people is something I'll never take for granted." But then, Steve, sensing an opportunity to connect on a deeper level, ventured into more personal waters once again. He asked Keanu about his experiences with loss and grief, topics that had been a part of Keanu's life for many years. Keanu's mother had passed away, and he had faced other significant personal losses. His response was measured, and though he didn't go into great detail, there was a palpable sense of respect and reverence in his words. "I've learned that grief is a part of life," Keanu said softly. "It's not something you get over, but something you learn to live with, and you carry the memories with you." Steve nodded in understanding, a somber expression on his face. It was a moment of rare vulnerability from the usually composed Keanu, and it made the entire studio pause. The audience, which had been laughing just moments before, sat in stunned silence, recognizing the depth of the conversation. Steve, ever. The compassionate host didn't push Keanu further on the subject, but instead acknowledged the weight of what Keanu had shared, and with that, the dynamic of the interview had completely shifted. What started as a playful exchange had transformed into something far more meaningful, a reminder that behind the public personas and on-screen images, these celebrities were real people, with their own struggles, triumphs, and complexities. Steve Harvey, known for his humor and quick wit, had managed to draw out a side of Keanu that very few had ever seen on public display. And in doing so, he had created an interview that would resonate with the audience long after the show had ended. Just when everyone thought the conversation was winding down into typical talk show fluff, Keanu surprised everyone. Known for his calm demeanor and soft-spoken words, Keanu suddenly shifted gears. The tone of the entire studio changed when he looked at Steve, his expression becoming more serious, his usual relaxed attitude giving way to something far deeper. Keanu's voice, typically steady and understated, was now deliberate, each word carefully chosen as if he had been holding something back all this time. It wasn't the playful Keanu the audience had grown accustomed to. It was the vulnerable, compassionate man who had been silently observing his friend for years. "You've been through a lot in your life, Steve," Keanu began, his gaze unwavering. "But I want you to know that your work means so much to so many people. You've inspired countless lives with your laughter, your strength, and your ability to make others smile, even when you're not at your best. I want you to know that we see you, we appreciate you, and we're grateful for the light you bring into this world." In that moment, a hush fell over the audience. The energy in the studio shifted completely. Keanu's words were a far cry from the playful banter the audience was used to. It was no longer just a celebrity interview. It was a rare and sincere moment of connection, one where Keanu reached deep into Steve's life and pulled something out that no one had expected. It wasn't just a compliment or a kind gesture. It was an acknowledgement of Steve's impact on the world, not just as a talk show host, but as a human being who had been through his own share of struggles. There was a moment of silence in the studio as the weight of Keanu's words settled over everyone. Steve, always quick with a comeback and never at a loss for words, was caught off guard. He wasn't prepared for this level of depth from Keanu, and for a brief moment, he couldn't find the words to respond. Steve Harvey, the man who had made a career out of keeping things light and entertaining, was suddenly faced with something real, something raw. His usual confident grin faded, replaced with an expression that was impossible to miss: disbelief, perhaps even awe, at the sincerity of the message. The silence stretched on as Steve looked at Keanu, his eyes slightly widened, as if searching for something to say. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The ever-confident talk show host, who had mastered the art of keeping conversations flowing effortlessly, was now at a loss. His usual jokes, his sharp humor, seemed miles away in that moment. It wasn't that Steve didn't have a witty comeback, or something clever to say. It was just that the gravity of Keanu's message had pierced through the layers of his usual banter. Steve's vulnerability, something he usually kept hidden behind his quick wit and larger-than-life personality, was now exposed in front of millions of viewers. The studio lights buzzed softly, their hum the only sound in the room as Steve took a long, deep breath. His eyes briefly dropped to the floor as he tried to collect himself, visibly moved by Keanu's words. It was a rare sight. Steve Harvey, the man who had spent decades entertaining audiences with his humor and confidence, standing in front of the camera, unsure of what to say. For a moment it was as though he had been transported to a different place, one where the laughter and applause no longer mattered. All that mattered was the recognition of his own worth, something Keanu had given him in that simple but powerful statement. I don't even know what to say, man, Steve finally said, his voice breaking slightly, betraying the emotion he was trying to hold back. He wiped his eyes, a gesture that was uncharacteristic for a man who had built his career on projecting strength and confidence. You know, I've been through a lot in my life, just like you said. And sometimes you forget why you keep doing what you do. You forget that your work can actually mean something to people. But this right here, it's a reminder that we're all connected, that we all have an impact. And that means more than anything. Steve paused for a moment, his eyes still fixed on Keanu, who watched him quietly, his face expressionless but kind. It was clear that Keanu wasn't just being polite. He wasn't just offering words for the sake of the interview. This was a real moment, a genuine connection between two men who had seen both the highs and lows of life. The audience, sensing the shift in energy, sat in complete silence. It wasn't awkward or uncomfortable, rather it was a moment of shared humanity. The kind of moment that only happens when two people, no matter how famous or accomplished they are, let their guard down and speak from the heart. It was a moment that reminded everyone in the room and everyone watching that behind the smiles, the jokes, and the larger-than-life personas, everyone has struggles, doubts, and moments of vulnerability. Keanu, never one to bask in the spotlight, simply nodded and offered a small, understanding smile. He didn't need to say anything more. His words had already landed, and the connection was made. It was clear that, in that moment, Keanu had given Steve something more valuable than just a compliment. He had given him the gift of validation, of knowing that the work he did, the laughter, the joy, the energy, had not gone unnoticed. As Steve composed himself, wiping away the remaining tears, he took a deep breath and looked back at Keanu. "Thank you," he said softly, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you for reminding me why we do what we do. You're a true one-of-a-kind guy, Keanu." The audience erupted into applause, but it wasn't just for the light-hearted moments or the jokes they had enjoyed throughout the show. It was for the authenticity and the emotional honesty that had unfolded right before their eyes. In a world where scripted interviews and rehearsed responses often overshadow the true nature of human connection, this was a rare and beautiful moment of genuine emotion. And for both Steve Harvey and Keanu Reeves, it was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful conversations happen when we simply let our guard down and speak from the heart. And then, just like that, it happened. Steve Harvey, the man who had made a career out of making others laugh, began to cry. For the audience who had watched Steve entertain millions with his wit, his larger-than-life personality, and his infectious laughter, this was a shocking sight. Steve, the comedian, the host, the man who could crack a joke in the toughest of moments, was now sitting there, visibly emotional. Slowly, with a trembling hand, he wiped a tear from his eye, his emotions clearly overwhelming him. The crowd, initially stunned by the unexpected turn of events, sat in complete silence. The usual sound of laughter, applause, and banter had completely dissipated, replaced with a deep, shared understanding of the profound moment unfolding on stage. Steve's voice, which was typically commanding, always filled with confidence and assurance, now cracked slightly as he spoke. It was a voice filled with raw emotion, a vulnerability that Steve had rarely shown. "You don't know what that means to me, Keanu," Steve began, his eyes still moist with emotion. "You really don't. I've been through a lot, and sometimes you wonder if your work is ever really seen. But this right here, this is why I do it. I do it for moments like this. Thank you for reminding me why it all matters." Kai, words hung in the air, and the audience felt the weight of them. In that instant, the emotional breakthrough had occurred. Steve Harvey, known for his unshakable confidence and his ability to make anyone laugh, had allowed himself to be vulnerable. He wasn't just cracking jokes or offering quips about life. He was revealing something deeper, something personal. It wasn't just about being a talk show host or a comedian. It was about being human, about the deep desire to be seen and appreciated for who we truly are, beyond the public persona. For years, Steve had been the face of laughter and joy, always providing entertainment with a smile, whether on the Steve Harvey Show or in front of a live audience. He had built a reputation as someone who could turn any situation into a joke, someone who made others feel good about themselves. Yet behind that exterior was a man who had experienced his own share of challenges. The pressures of being in the public eye, the personal struggles, the moments of self-doubt. All of these things had been hidden behind the mask of humor. Keanu's words had done something profound. They had peeled back those layers and revealed the person behind the eye. Jokes. Steve wasn't just a public figure. He was someone who had felt the weight of the world, someone who had carried the burden of expectation, and someone who had moments when he, too, needed validation and encouragement. Keanu's words weren't just words. They were a lifeline, a reminder that even the most successful and confident individuals have their own struggles and insecurities. For Steve, who had spent much of his life making others laugh at his own expense, this was a moment of self-reflection. His vulnerability, so rarely shown to the world, had become the focal point of the interview. And in that moment, Steve realized something he hadn't fully grasped before. His work, his laughter, and his resilience mattered. The joy he brought to others wasn't just about filling airtime or getting a laugh. It was about touching lives, about helping people see the brighter side of life, even in their darkest moments. As the audience continued to sit in silence, sharing in this raw moment, Steve's face softened. He wasn't the man who commanded the stage with force and authority anymore. He was simply Steve, a man who had fought through his own battles and was now acknowledging that he was seen, he was appreciated, and his work was making a difference. Keanu, sitting across from Steve, had said exactly what Steve needed to hear at that moment. Keanu's own understated humility and generosity had resonated deeply with Steve. For years, Keanu had remained somewhat of an enigma to the public, his personal life shielded from the spotlight. And yet, here he was, offering Steve a gift that few people could give: acknowledgement. Keanu had reminded Steve that despite all the humor, the jokes, and the entertaining moments, there was real value in what he did. His influence went far beyond what could be measured by ratings or audience reactions. He had the power to lift people up, to make them feel seen, and to bring them comfort during tough times. Steve took a moment, his breathing steadying, and finally gave Keanu a small, grateful smile. "You really don't know how much that means, man," he said softly, the gratitude in his voice evident. "Thank you for reminding me that the work I do matters. You've been through a lot too, and hearing you say that, I just can't tell you how much it means." The room, which had been filled with tension just moments before, now felt lighter, more connected. The audience, who had been witnessing the incredible shift in the conversation, erupted into applause. Not just for the heartfelt exchange, but for the sincerity and openness both men had shown. It was a moment that reminded everyone in the room, whether they were a fan of Steve or Keanu or simply a viewer, of the power of human connection. Steve Harvey had given so much of himself to his audience over the years, but in that vulnerable moment he received something in return, something priceless. Keanu's acknowledgement had been a gift, and it was a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful moments aren't scripted or planned. They just happen. For the rest of the show, Steve and Keanu continued their conversation, but the energy had shifted. It was no longer just an interview. It was a shared experience, one where both men had connected on a level that transcended the stage, the cameras, and the audience. It was a powerful reminder that even the most polished public figures have their own struggles, and that showing vulnerability, accepting support, and acknowledging the impact we have on each other are the things that truly matter in the end. As the cameras captured Steve's emotional breakdown, Keanu remained calm, offering a quiet, understanding smile. He didn't rush to comfort Steve with quick words or attempt to fill the silence with unnecessary chatter. Instead, he allowed the moment to breathe, giving Steve the space to process his emotions in front of millions of viewers. This wasn't just a scripted moment or an attempt to create drama. It was something deeply real and raw. Keanu, always known for his humility, respected Steve's vulnerability, giving him the time he needed to collect himself without feeling rushed. The audience, still silent, seemed to understand the significance of what had just happened. They weren't merely spectators of a celebrity interview anymore. They were witnesses to something far more profound. It wasn't just an exchange between a talk show host and an actor. It had evolved into a genuine human moment, where two people, despite their fame and success, had allowed themselves to be seen for who they truly were. The cameras, which had been focused on Steve's tear-filled face, now captured the vulnerability that transcended the usual celebrity facade. There was something deeply moving about watching a public figure, known for his confidence and humor, allow himself to feel and express his emotions. And in doing so, Steve had opened a door for the audience, giving them permission to be vulnerable as well. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, and yet it was clear that no one in the studio wanted to break it. The usual hum of the talk show set, the background chatter, and the applause had all faded away. What remained was a moment of connection, a reminder that despite the celebrity status, the glitz and glamour, everyone experiences feelings of doubt, fear, and longing for reassurance. This wasn't about the next witty remark or the punchline to keep the show moving. This was a moment of reflection, not just for Steve, but for everyone in that room, and perhaps for everyone watching at home. After a few moments, Steve composed himself, wiping away his tears and taking a deep breath. The audience held their collective breath, waiting to see how he would respond. Steve had always been known for his ability to command a room with his humor, but this was a different kind of energy. There was a vulnerability in the air, and Steve, in his own way, acknowledged it. "Thank you, Keanu. I didn't expect this," Steve said, his voice still slightly shaky but steadily regaining its usual warmth. "But sometimes, you just need to hear the right words at the right time. This is that moment for me." His words were simple, but they resonated deeply. It was clear that Steve wasn't just thanking Keanu for the kind words he had spoken. He was thanking him for giving him permission to feel, for reminding him of his own worth and the significance of his work. In that moment, Steve wasn't just a talk show host. He was a person who, like anyone else, needed validation, needed a reminder that the impact of his work mattered, and that he had made a difference in the lives of others. The room, which had been filled with tension just moments before, now erupted into applause. But this wasn't applause out of politeness or for the sake of completing the segment. It was an authentic, heartfelt response. The crowd's standing ovation wasn't just for the entertainment that Steve provided on a daily basis. It was for the humanity he had shown in front of them. It was for the courage it took to allow himself to be vulnerable, to let go of the armor he had built over the years, and to show the audience that even the strongest people need a little reassurance sometimes. Keanu, sitting across from Steve, remained calm and composed, his eyes reflecting the understanding and kindness he had shown throughout the entire exchange. He smiled warmly at Steve, not in a patronizing way, but with a sincere expression of empathy. He understood. Keanu knew what it was like to live under the scrutiny of the public eye, to have your every move analyzed, and to feel the pressure of being something you're not. By speaking those words to Steve, he had not only acknowledged Steve's influence, but had also validated the very essence of what Steve had built throughout his career. Keanu's humility and kindness had set the tone for the entire exchange, creating a space where both men could be real, where they didn't have to hide behind their public personas, and where they could connect as human beings. The applause continued, but there was a sense of stillness in the air. It was as if everyone in the studio and at home knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Not just an interview, but a moment of connection that transcended the usual surface-level interactions we often see between celebrities. The moment was a reminder of the power of simple words, of the impact they can have on someone's soul. For Steve, it was a chance to reflect on the legacy he had built and the importance of recognizing his own worth. For Keanu, it was a reminder of the quiet power he had, his ability to touch lives, not through grand gestures, but through kindness and sincerity. Both men, in their own ways, had shown that vulnerability is not a weakness, but a strength that can create the kind of genuine connections that go beyond the spotlight. As the interview came to a close, Steve Harvey looked out at the audience, his voice steady now. "Thank you for this moment," he said, his eyes still glistening. "Thank you, Keanu, for reminding me of something I've needed to hear. It's something I'll never forget." With that, the show came to a close, but the impact of the moment lingered long after the cameras stopped rolling. For those in the studio, for the millions watching at home, and for Steve and Keanu themselves, this emotional exchange was a powerful reminder of the strength that lies in being open, honest, and vulnerable, even in the face of overwhelming odds. It was a moment that would be remembered not for the laughs, but for the genuine connection between two remarkable men. The rest of the interview carried on, but the atmosphere had undeniably shifted. The lightheartedness that had defined the beginning of the conversation was now replaced with a deeper understanding between Steve Harvey and Keanu Reeves. What had started as a playful, comedic exchange had transformed into something far more significant. A genuine, emotional connection between two men who had both experienced the highs and lows of life in the public eye. Steve Harvey, the man who had spent years in the spotlight making others laugh, had just shown a side of himself that very few people outside his inner circle had ever seen. His vulnerability, in that instant, had opened up a new chapter in his career, one where his audience saw him not just as a comedian or a talk show host, but as a human being who had lived through struggles, faced his own battles, and perhaps more importantly, had the courage to show it. This was no longer just a celebrity interview. It was an honest, raw moment where both men acknowledged the realities of life, far beyond the glamour and comedy that often dominated their public personas. For Steve, this was a turning point. The facade he had so carefully crafted over the years, the larger-than-life persona, the man who could always crack a joke even in the face of adversity, had been momentarily stripped away. What remained was Steve Harvey, the man who had overcome personal struggles, dealt with setbacks, and like so many others, had moments of doubt. But instead of hiding those moments, Steve had embraced them, and in doing so, he had connected with his audience on a level that transcended mere entertainment. It was a moment of humanity that made him more relatable, more grounded, and perhaps more loved by those who tuned in every week to watch him. Keanu Reeves, for his part, had not only offered Steve words of kindness and encouragement, but had also reminded him of something incredibly important, the power of kindness and the profound effect that simple, heartfelt words can have on someone's life. Keanu's own humility, his quiet strength, and his ability to recognize the emotional weight of the moment had made all the difference. In an industry where fame and success often lead to a sense of isolation, Keanu had taken a step to reach out, offering Steve something invaluable: recognition and validation. This wasn't just a kind remark, it was an acknowledgement of Steve's work, of his impact, and of the legacy he had built through years of making others smile. Keanu had shown Steve that despite the jokes, the laughter, and the career achievements, the most meaningful thing one can receive is recognition from another person who understands what it truly means to struggle and to rise above it. This powerful moment of vulnerability and support marked a turning point for both men, shifting the dynamic of their relationship from just two public figures sharing a stage to two individuals connecting on a profoundly human level. As the show wrapped up, the emotional exchange between Steve and Keanu became the undeniable highlight of the night. The show ended with the audience giving them a standing ovation, not just for the entertainment they had provided, but for the heart and sincerity that had been on full display. This wasn't a moment of scripted laughter or perfectly timed punchlines. It was a raw, real connection between two men who had both experienced the weight of the world and had found solace in each other's words. For those in the studio and those watching at home, it was an unforgettable scene, one that would linger long after the credits rolled. The conversation quickly became a trending topic on social media, sparking conversations from fans, celebrities, and ordinary viewers alike. People took to Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to share their thoughts on the emotional exchange. Fans praised the sincerity and depth of the conversation, marveling at the rare glimpse they had been given into the humanity of two of the most beloved figures in entertainment. The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many expressing gratitude for witnessing such a powerful moment on television. For so many, it was a reminder that even the biggest stars, those who seem untouchable, have their own vulnerabilities, doubts, and moments of reflection. In the end, Steve Harvey's tears weren't just about sadness. They were about gratitude, reflection, and the powerful connection that can be forged through simple, heartfelt words. They weren't just tears for the struggles he had faced in his personal life. They were tears for the reminder that even in moments of hardship, there are people who see you, who acknowledge your work, and who understand your journey. Keanu's message, while directed at Steve, was a reminder for all of us. Never underestimate the impact we have on one another's lives. For Steve, it was a reminder that, despite all his achievements, even the biggest stars need reassurance from time to time. They need to know that the work they do, the laughs they provide, and the joy they bring to others actually matters. Steve Harvey had spent years making people laugh, but it was in this moment, when he allowed himself to be vulnerable, that he found a deeper connection with his audience. It was a lesson in the power of kindness, the importance of showing up for others, and the undeniable truth that sometimes the simplest gestures are the most profound. In the end, this exchange wasn't just a highlight of the night. It was a reminder that kindness, vulnerability, and human connection are the things that truly matter in life. It was a lesson that transcended the world of entertainment and reminded us all of the incredible power of words and the impact they can have on our lives.